The chamber was older than most civilizations. Its walls were carved from black stone that had been pulled from a dying star, a star that no longer existed in a system that no map remembered. The ceiling stretched so high that clouds formed near the top, thin whispers of vapor that drifted like ghosts between the pillars. The floor was smooth and cold, polished by 10,000 years of footsteps from 10,000 different species. This was the Grand Hall of the Galactic Council. And today it was full. Every seat was taken. Delegates from 412 civilizations had come in person. Another 600 watched through quantum link screens from systems too far to travel. Translators hummed quietly in every ear. The air smelled of ozone and nervousness. They had all come to see one thing. An old man. He sat alone at the center of the hall, in a plain chair that the council staff had almost not provided. They had assumed he would bring his own throne, his own entourage, his own fleet of attendants. That was how ancient species usually arrived. With power. With display. With the full weight of their history pressed into every gesture. But Orin had arrived alone. No ship escort. No attendants. No ceremonial robes or ancient weapons or glowing artifacts. He had walked through the main entrance like any visitor, shown a simple identification chip to a confused guard, and asked politely where he should sit. He was, by every biological measure, old. His skin was the color of pale sand, thin as paper, mapped with lines that told stories no living being could fully read. His eyes were a deep amber, almost orange, and they moved slowly, deliberately, like two small suns that had learned patience over billions of years. His hands rested on his knees. They did not shake. He wore a simple gray robe. He looked like someone's grandfather. He was the last surviving member of the Ethini, the oldest known species in the recorded galaxy. His civilization had been ancient before Earth's sun had ignited. His people had watched the first stars die. They had mapped galaxies that no longer existed. They had made contact with species that modern science had no record of, because those species had risen and fallen before anyone else had learned to write. And now there was only him. Chief Arbiter Voss stood at the head of the chamber, tall and pale-skinned, her three eyes scanning the crowd with practiced authority. She was Velhari, a proud species only 11,000 years old, which in galactic terms made them practically children. But they were sharp, political, and they ran the council with aggressive efficiency. She did not fully understand why the old man made her nervous. She told herself it was the history. The weight of what he represented. Nothing more. She tapped the resonance rod against the podium and the chamber fell silent instantly. This council is now in session, Voss said, her voice amplified through the hall. Case reference, 77 Omega. The matter before this council is the proposed authorization of force against the planet designated Earth, third orbital body of a yellow dwarf star in the Orion Arm, home species, human. A murmur moved through the crowd like wind through tall grass. This council has debated the matter for 6 standard years, Voss continued. The humans have refused 3 separate diplomatic frameworks. They have expanded their territorial boundaries without authorization. They have reverse-engineered restricted technology. And in the incident at Kepler Station, they destroyed a council enforcement vessel with what our analysts describe as, she paused, glancing at her notes, improvised materials. More murmuring. A few delegates laughed. Nervous laughter. Before this council votes on authorization, Voss said, her voice sharpening, one final testimony has been requested. By ancient law older than this council, older than the Velhari, older than most species in this room, any surviving member of a founding species may address this body before any vote of war. She looked down at the old man. Orin of the Ethini. You have the floor. The old man did not stand immediately. He sat for a moment longer, his amber eyes moving slowly across the faces of the crowd. Hundreds of species. Thousands of individuals. All watching him. All waiting. He had been in rooms like this before. Not this room was new, barely 3,000 years old, but rooms like it. Rooms full of confident beings who had already made up their minds and were waiting for the formality of testimony to conclude so they could do what they had already decided to do. He recognized the energy. He had seen it before. He slowly pushed himself to his feet. His joints did not crack. His back did not bend. He stood straight and still and quiet. And then he began to speak. I will not argue with your evidence, he said. His voice was soft, not weak but soft like something that had learned long ago that it did not need to be loud to be heard. The translators carried it perfectly to every ear in the room. I will not debate your legal frameworks. I will not tell you that you are wrong about what the humans have done. He paused. I will only tell you what I saw. and then you will decide. He looked at Voss directly. I was there, he said. At the beginning. And I am asking you, as the last voice of the first people, do not do this. The chamber was completely silent. Voss leaned forward slightly. You will have full time to present your testimony, Elder. But this council requires specific answers. Our first question is simple. She folded her hands. Why should we fear them? They are young. They are chaotic. They are barely 400 years into space travel. Why does a species as ancient as yours counsel fear of something so new? The old man looked at her for a long moment. And then very slowly his amber eyes filled with tears. The sight of it shocked the room more than any weapon could have. Delegates leaned forward. Whispers broke out and were immediately silenced. Even Voss, composed and political and sharp, felt something cold move through her chest. An ancient being, the last of the oldest species in the known galaxy, was crying. He did not wipe the tears away. He let them fall. Fear is not the right word, he said quietly. I did not come here to make you afraid. He looked out at the crowd. I came here because I was there. On Earth. In the early days. Before any of you knew they existed. Before they knew we existed. He paused. I watched them. For a very long time. And I learned something about them that your databases cannot tell you, that your analysts cannot measure, that your 6 years of diplomatic reports cannot capture. He was quiet for a moment. I watched them refuse to die. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. Not once. Not twice. 1,000 times. 1,000,000 times. Every generation, in every age, in every catastrophe your models would have marked as extinction level, I watched them look at the end of everything, and refuse. He sat back down slowly. That is my testimony. All 12 parts of it. And by the time I am finished, he looked at Voss with those ancient, wet eyes, I hope you will understand why I am not here to argue. He folded his hands in his lap. I am here to beg. The chamber waited. Oren closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, something had shifted in his expression. The tears were still there, drying slowly on his ancient face, but his eyes had gone somewhere else. Somewhere far. Somewhere that existed not in this hall, not in this galaxy as it currently stood, but in a version of time that no living being in this room had access to. He was remembering. And somehow, every being in that chamber felt it. Not through technology. Not through translation. But through something older than both. The simple, undeniable weight of genuine memory in a face that had actually lived it. I found Earth, he began, by accident. A small ripple moved through the crowd. The last surviving member of the oldest species in the galaxy. And he had found humanity by accident. My people were mappers, he continued. That was our first great project. Before philosophy, before warfare, before art, we mapped. We believed that to understand the universe you must first know its shape. So we traveled. Every Athene who came of age was given a vessel and a sector and told, go. See what is there. Come back and tell us. He looked down at his hands. I was young. Young for my kind, which means I was perhaps 600 years old. I had been assigned a quiet sector, a backwater arm of a mid-sized galaxy. Nothing special. The star charts suggested maybe 3 or 4 inhabited worlds, nothing above early biological complexity. Simple life. Single cells. Perhaps, if I was fortunate, something that had learned to crawl. He paused. I almost didn't stop at the 3rd planet of that yellow star. The readings were chaotic. Atmospheric composition was unstable. The surface showed evidence of repeated catastrophic events. Impact craters, volcanic scarring, evidence of at least 2 near-complete extinction events in the geological record. My instruments marked it as a hostile environment with low probability of complex life. He almost smiled. I stopped anyway. I don't know why. Perhaps curiosity. Perhaps boredom. Perhaps something in the universe nudged my hand on the navigation controls. I have thought about that moment for 4 billion years and I still do not have an answer. He looked up at the ceiling, at the clouds drifting near the top of the ancient chamber. What I found when I arrived in orbit was a small, loud, violent, beautiful, impossible world. His voice had changed slightly. Something warmer had entered it. Something that the universal translators struggled slightly to carry, not because of language but because the emotion behind it was so complex, so layered with time, that modern languages had no single word for it. There were creatures everywhere. Not just life. Life was common, we had seen life on 10,000 worlds. But these creatures were different. They were competing. With everything. With each other. With the planet. With the weather. With their own bodies. with death itself. He leaned forward slightly. I watched a creature, small, two-legged, covered in thin fur, fall into a river. The current was strong. The water was cold. By every biological calculation, it should have drowned within minutes. His body was not built for that current. It had no gills, no water adaptation, no physical advantage whatsoever. He paused. It swam anyway. For 2 hours. Against the current. With its small arms that were never designed for such a thing. And it reached the bank. And it lay there, making loud noises that my instruments could not yet translate. And then, he stopped and something like wonder crossed his ancient face. It stood up. And it walked away. The chamber was absolutely silent. I thought it was an anomaly, Oren said. A single remarkable individual. So I kept watching. Days. Then years. Then decades. I told myself I would leave soon. I kept not leaving. He sat back. I watched them fail. Constantly. They failed at everything over and over, in ways that should have broken them permanently. Their early shelters collapsed. They rebuilt. Their food sources vanished. They found new ones. Diseases swept through their populations. They died by the thousands, and the ones who survived changed, adapted, pushed forward. A volcanic eruption destroyed an entire settlement I had been observing for 60 years. I thought, this is it. This group is finished. He shook his head slowly. 3 generations later, they had built a new settlement twice the size. On the slope of the same volcano. A few sounds moved through the crowd. Not quite laughter. Not quite disbelief. Something in between. I began to understand that what I was watching was not ordinary biological persistence, Oren said, his voice quieter now. Every other species we had mapped had a breaking point. A level of catastrophe beyond which the survivors simply stopped. Stopped rebuilding. Stopped trying. Accepted the new equilibrium and lived smaller, quieter lives within it. This was not weakness. This was intelligence. This was survival mathematics. You do not spend energy fighting what cannot be beaten. He looked around the room. Humans never learn this lesson. Or perhaps, he paused, perhaps they learned it and rejected it. Consciously. Deliberately. As a species-level choice. He let that sit for a moment. A great cold came. Global. Catastrophic. Ice advanced across continents. The humans, still primitive, still early, still without fire in the way they would later master it, should have retreated to the equatorial regions and survived in small, isolated bands. The mathematics of it were clear. Retrench. Reduce. Survive small. He leaned forward. Instead they followed the ice. Silence. They walked into the coldest regions on the planet. Into the advancing glaciers. They learned to read the ice. They learned to hunt the animals that lived in it. They wore the skins of those animals. They carved tools from the bones. They built shelters from the tusks of creatures 3 times their size that they had killed with sharpened rocks tied to wooden sticks. His voice was barely above a whisper now, but it filled the chamber completely. I watched a group of 11 humans, 11, take down a creature that weighed as much as a small spacecraft. They did it with coordination. With planning. With what I can only describe even now as strategy. They communicated with sounds and gestures. They divided roles. Some drove the creature. Some waited in position. One individual, smaller than the others I noted, likely young, ran directly at the creature's face to distract it while the others moved in from the sides. He stopped. The young one was injured. Badly. It should not have survived the night. He looked at his hands again. The group stopped their migration for 9 days. In killing cold. In dangerous territory. They stopped and they cared for the injured one. They shared their food. They kept the fire burning through the night specifically positioned to keep that one individual warm. 9 days. In conditions that should have forced them to move or die. His jaw tightened slightly. The injured one survived. And when the group finally moved on, the young one walked with them. Slowly. But walked. He raised his eyes to the council. I had mapped 600 worlds by that point. I had seen complex life on 40 of them. Cooperative behavior on 12. What I would call proto-civilization on 3. He paused. I had never seen anything like this. This willingness to pay impossible costs for one another. This absolute refusal to accept the mathematics of loss. He was quiet for a moment. I sent a message home. To my people. I told them, I have found something remarkable. I told them, I do not think the normal models apply here. I told them, I am going to stay longer. He almost smiled again. I stayed 400,000 years. The murmuring that broke out across the chamber was immediate and loud. Voss let it run for a moment before tapping the resonance rod. "Elder," she said carefully, "you observed Earth for 400,000 years before first contact?" "Before formal contact," Orin corrected gently. "I made informal contact many times. Sat by fires. Shared meals. Learned languages, many of them as they changed and grew and split and merged. I was not always the same shape." He touched his face. "We could adapt our forms in those days. I was a river to some of them. A mountain spirit to others. An old traveler who appeared at camps and told stories and was gone by morning." He looked out at the crowd. "I loved them," he said simply. "The way you love something that continuously astonishes you. Every generation showed me something new. Every century brought a development my models had not predicted. They were surprising. Always surprising. In 4 billion years of mapping this galaxy, the Ethini learned to predict almost everything. Life follows patterns. Civilizations follow patterns. Rise, expansion, stabilization, decline, the shapes change but the mathematics remain." He shook his head. "Humans broke the mathematics. Regularly. As a habit. Almost as a sport." He folded his hands. "This is what I came to tell you. Not about their weapons. Not about their ships or their technology or their refusal of your diplomatic frameworks." He looked directly at Voss. "Those things are real and they are impressive for a species their age, but they are not the reason my people issued the warning." He paused. "The warning was issued because of what we understood humans to be, at the deepest level. Not what they could build. Not what they could destroy." He looked around the room one final time before settling back into stillness. What they could survive. Orin waited for the chamber to settle before he continued. He was patient. He had always been patient. Patience was easy when you had lived long enough to watch mountains form from nothing and oceans fill from dry rock. A room full of nervous delegates was nothing. He let them murmur and shift and whisper to one another. He let them process. He understood that what he was giving them was not just information, it was scale. And scale took time to absorb. When the room was quiet again, he spoke. 40,000 years ago, he said, by your standard calendar, Earth experienced what your scientists would classify as a civilizational stress event. In practical terms, several large and competing human groups wanted the same territory. The land was fertile. The water was clean. The hunting was good. And there was not enough of it for everyone. He paused. This is not unusual. We had seen territorial conflicts on dozens of worlds. They typically resolve in one of three ways. The weaker group retreats. The groups negotiate a boundary. Or one group destroys the other completely. Clean outcomes. Mathematically predictable. He looked at the floor for a moment. What happened on Earth was none of those things. He shifted slightly in his chair. The conflict began as expected. Two main groups. Competition for the river valley. Early skirmishes, small, fast, brutal. My instruments tracked casualties on both sides. I had seen this pattern before. Within a generation I expected resolution. One group would prove stronger. The other would fragment and disperse. He paused. Instead, a third group arrived. Smaller than both. Poorly equipped. They had traveled a very long distance to reach this valley and they were exhausted and hungry. By every calculation they were irrelevant to the conflict. A footnote. Background detail. He looked up. They walked directly into the space between the two warring groups. Unarmed. And they started talking. The chamber was very still. Both sides told them to leave. Both sides threatened them. The third group kept talking. For 3 days they moved back and forth between the two camps, carrying words, carrying small gifts, carrying, and this is the part my instruments almost failed to record correctly, carrying the specific grievances of each side to the other. Not as accusations. As information. As, he paused, searching for the right word, as understanding. He shook his head slowly. On the fourth day, representatives from all three groups sat together by the river. They argued for a long time. Loudly. My early translation models were rough, but I caught the shape of it. Territory, resources, history, old wounds, old debts. Everything came out. Ugly and complicated and very human. He almost smiled. By the end of the fourth day they had an agreement. The valley would be shared in a rotation. Each group would have primary access during different seasons. The third group, the ones who had no business being there, who had arrived starving and exhausted and unarmed, received the first season. As payment for the mediation. He let that sit. I had not seen that before. In 600 worlds. I had seen negotiation. I had seen treaties born of exhaustion. But I had never seen a species instinctively insert a mediating party into a binary conflict and then reward that party for the insertion. The mathematics of it were strange, inefficient by standard models. And yet it worked. That agreement held for 6 generations. He paused. I recorded it carefully and sent another message home. I told my people, they are doing something new. Something we don't have a model for. They are converting conflict into relationship. He let out a slow breath. My people were interested but not alarmed. Not yet. He looked out at the crowd. The alarm came later. It came because of what happened when the negotiation failed. He was quiet for a moment. Something moved across his face, not quite pain but the memory of pain. The ghost of an emotion that had been felt so long ago that it had worn smooth with time, like a stone in a river. A different conflict. Different groups. Different territory. But the same basic shape. Competition, scarcity, escalating tension. This time there was no third group. No mediator. And one of the two sides made a decision that your military analysts would recognize immediately. He looked at the military delegates section of the chamber. They decided to end it completely. Not defeat the other side. And every individual. Every settlement. Every trace. His voice remained even. They nearly succeeded. The target group was reduced, within a single season of violence, to approximately 40 individuals. 40. From thousands. Scattered, separated, deep in hostile terrain with no supplies, no shelter, no weapons worth the name. He looked around the room. At that point, in every model my people had ever built, the outcome was certain. 40 isolated individuals in hostile terrain, hunted by an organized force with winter coming. He paused. The mathematics gave them no path forward. We marked the group as functionally extinct. We began documenting them as a concluded chapter. He stopped. The silence stretched. They survived, said a voice from the crowd, young, disbelieving, a junior delegate who immediately looked embarrassed for speaking out. Oren looked at the delegate with something like warmth. They survived, he confirmed. But that is not the remarkable part. Many species have survival stories. Small groups persisting against odds. We had documented it before. He leaned forward. The remarkable part was how. He held up one finger. They found each other. 40 individuals, scattered across hostile terrain, hunted, with no communication technology, they found each other. Over the course of one winter. One by one. As if they were pulled by something our instruments could not measure. Second finger. When they found each other, they did not hunker down and hide. They trained. In the coldest months of the worst winter on record, with barely enough food to survive, they trained. The stronger ones taught the weaker ones. The older ones taught the younger ones. Skills. Methods. Techniques. They built capability in the middle of catastrophe. Third finger. And in the spring, 40 individuals, they counterattacked. The chamber erupted. Voss let it go for a full minute before restoring order. Even she looked shaken. 40 individuals, Oren repeated, calm in the center of the noise. Against a force that had nearly wiped them from the earth. They did not win because they had superior numbers. They did not win because they had superior weapons. They won because they were, he paused, because they were angry, and organized, and completely, utterly unwilling to accept what the mathematics had clearly told them was the only possible outcome. He settled back. The attacking force was destroyed. Completely. Their settlements were absorbed. Their territory was claimed. And the 40 who should have been a concluded chapter in our records, became the foundation of one of the longest-lasting cultural lineages in human history. He looked at Voss. That was when my people stopped being interested, he said quietly, and started being concerned. He folded his hands again. Because we ran the models. We looked at what 40 individuals had done and we asked, what would 4,000 do? What would 4 million do? What would 4 billion do, given enough time and sufficient provocation? He was quiet. The models broke, he said simply. Every model we had. They broke because humans do not follow the curve. They follow something else. Something we did not have a name for. He looked at the chamber. We named it eventually. It took us a long time to find the right word. We tried many: resilience, persistence, aggression, adaptability. None of them were quite right. He paused. The word we finally settled on in our language has no direct translation in any modern tongue. The closest equivalent in your common trading language is approximately, he thought for a moment, refusal. He let the word sit in the air. Not the refusal of a single individual. Not the refusal of a moment. But refusal as a fundamental species characteristic. As a genetic trait. As a thing baked into them at a level below thought, below culture, below language. He looked around the room one final time. Humans refuse. That is what they do. That is what they are. When the universe says stop, they refuse. When the mathematics say impossible, they refuse. When every model, every calculation, every logical framework says this is the end. He paused. They refuse. He sat back. And I have watched them do it, he said softly, for 4 billion years. And I have never, not once, seen the universe win. Chief Arbiter Voss called a recess. She needed one. She would not have admitted this, not to her staff, not to the council, not to the 100 political observers currently filing reports back to their home systems, but she needed it. She needed to stand in a small side room with a glass of cold water and remind herself of the facts. The facts were clear. The facts were documented. 6 years of diplomatic engagement with humanity had produced 3 failed frameworks, 1 destroyed enforcement vessel, and a growing list of unauthorized territorial expansions. The humans were disruptive. They were non-compliant. They were, by every legal metric, in violation of 16 separate council statutes. She was also aware that she had just spent the better part of 2 hours listening to the last surviving member of the oldest species in the galaxy talk about 40 people who should have died and didn't. She drank her water. She went back inside. When the session resumed, Oren was exactly as she had left him, still, hands folded, amber eyes patient. He had probably not moved. She suspected he could sit without moving for longer than her entire civilization had existed. Elder, she said, settling back into her chair. You mentioned that your people issued a formal warning regarding Earth. Can you speak to the circumstances of that warning? Oren nodded slowly. The warning was issued approximately 2 million years ago, he began, by your standard calendar. At that time, humanity was still biological in the early sense. Not yet the civilization you would recognize, but the unbroken ancestral line was present. The trajectory was already established. He paused. My people had been observing Earth for a very long time by then. I had filed thousands of reports. I was not the only Ethini who had visited. Others had come, looked, and left with the same general assessment. Remarkable. Unusual. Unprecedented in several specific ways. But not yet, alarming. He folded his hands more deliberately. What changed was a modeling project. A large one. Our greatest scientific minds? And the Ethini produced very great scientific minds, I say this not with pride but simply as fact. Spent approximately 60,000 years building the most comprehensive predictive model ever attempted. They took everything we knew about human behavior, human biology, human social dynamics, and ran it forward. As far as the mathematics would go. He was quiet for a moment. They ran the model 47 times with different variables. Different rates of development. Different levels of external pressure. Different resource environments. Different contact scenarios with other species. He looked at the scientific delegates in the chamber. In 47 out of 47 runs, he said, humanity became the dominant force in the galaxy. The chamber did not erupt this time. It went completely, perfectly silent. The kind of silence that happens when a room full of intelligent beings simultaneously understand something they wish they didn't. The timelines varied, Oren continued. The fastest projection had them at galactic dominance within 800,000 years of achieving spaceflight. The slowest, 3.2 million years. But the endpoint was consistent. Completely consistent. Across every variable we tested, every scenario we modeled, every adjustment we made. He paused. There was not a single run in which humanity stabilized at a mid-level civilization and stayed there. Not one. They always grew. They always expanded. They always refused the ceiling the mathematics tried to place on them. Voss leaned forward. And this led to the warning? The warning was debated, Oren said. Heavily. My people were not, we were not a fearful species. We had seen much. We believed in coexistence. We believed in the richness of diversity. Many of my people argued that humanity should be left alone entirely. That any interference would be wrong. He paused. Others argued for early intervention. Controlled contact. Careful guidance that would shape the trajectory toward something more predictable. His jaw tightened slightly. And some argued for termination. The word landed like a stone in still water. I want to be clear, Oren said, his voice very calm and very deliberate. This was a minority position. A small minority. But it was argued. The mathematics some of my people believed demanded it. A species that could not be contained, that could not be predicted, that in every model eventually became the dominant force in the galaxy. This was not, some argued, a neighbor. It was a future inevitability that could be addressed now or addressed later at far greater cost. He looked around the room. I argued against it, strongly. I had spent 400,000 years sitting by human fires and walking through human settlements and watching human children learn to speak their first words. I knew them in a way the modelers did not. I knew that what the models were measuring as a threat was not aggression. It was not ambition. It was simply, he paused, what they were. They could not help it any more than a river can help flowing downhill. He folded his hands. The debate lasted 11,000 years. In the end, the Council of the Atheni, the full council, all voices, all regions, voted on a position. He paused. The vote was against termination. Decisively. My people were many things, but we were not, at our core, destroyers. We had lived long enough to know that the universe did not forgive that kind of choice. He looked at Voss. But we were also not naive. The models were real. The trajectory was real. And so we issued the warning. To every spacefaring civilization we could reach. Written in every language we knew. Carved on monuments placed in locations that would survive geological time. He paused. The warning said 3 things. First, this species exists on this world at these coordinates. Second, they will grow beyond all predictive models. Third, do not antagonize them. He let that sit. Not, do not contact them. Not, do not trade with them. Not, avoid them. He looked directly at Voss. Do not antagonize them. This was the specific word. The specific warning. Voss was quiet for a moment. And the reasoning? Because we had run one additional model, Oren said. Not about their growth under normal conditions. About their growth under pressure. He paused. A human civilization growing without external threat follows a curve. Remarkable, yes. Unprecedented, yes. But a curve, you can see it, you can track it, you have perhaps 600,000 years before the implications become unavoidable. He looked at her steadily. A human civilization that believes it is under existential threat does not follow any curve we could model. The mathematics simply stopped. There was no ceiling we could calculate. There was no timeline. There was no predictable endpoint. He leaned forward very slightly. There was only acceleration. He settled back. This is the warning we issued. This is the warning we placed on monuments across 14 star systems. This is the warning that the Atheni, every last one of us, as a unanimous species-level decision, sent into the galaxy 2 million years ago. He looked around the chamber. And this is the warning that this council, 6 years ago, when they began formal hostile engagement with Earth, he paused, chose to ignore. Voss said nothing for a moment. Around her, the chamber was very, very quiet. Elder, she said finally, carefully. Are you telling this council that by initiating diplomatic pressure, by sending enforcement vessels, by the incident at Kepler Station, we have already? Yes, Oren said. Simple. Quiet. Absolute. The warning was not about what humans would do if left alone, he said. It was about what humans would do if they concluded, correctly or incorrectly, it does not matter which, that the galaxy was hostile to them. He looked at her with those ancient, tired amber eyes. And I am here to tell you, after 6 years of your enforcement vessels and your failed frameworks and your legal sanctions, they have already concluded it. He was quiet. The question before this council is not whether to authorize force, he said. The question, the only question that matters now, is whether you understand what nobody called for a recess this time. Nobody moved. Nobody whispered to their neighbor. The 600 delegates watching on quantum-link screens and distant systems had gone so quiet that the council's communication team initially thought the feeds had dropped. They hadn't dropped. 600 civilizations were simply sitting very still, listening to an old man tell them something they did not want to know. Voss looked at Oren for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was carefully controlled, the voice of a politician, measured and precise. But underneath it, something else was working. Something that her training had no name for. Elder, she said. You mentioned that the warning was placed on monuments. That it was distributed widely. And yet, she paused, this council has no record of it. Our historians have no record of it. In 6,000 years of galactic record-keeping, we have found no mention of this warning. Oren looked at her. No, he said. You would not have. Why? Because the civilizations that received it, he said quietly, and heeded it, Did not write it down in places where young civilizations could find it. He paused. They did not want you to find it. The silence shifted quality. It became something denser. They were protecting you? Voss asked. They were protecting themselves, Oren said without judgment. If a young civilization knows that one particular world is considered uniquely dangerous, what does a young civilization do? He waited. He genuinely waited, not rhetorically but patiently, as if he was willing to let someone answer. A young delegate near the back, one of the Thessari, copper-skinned and wide-eyed, spoke up quietly. They try to strike first, before the dangerous world becomes dangerous. Oren looked at the delegate with something like approval. Yes, he said. Which would accomplish exactly what the warning was designed to prevent. So the civilizations that received it kept it among themselves. Passed it internally. Quietly. In the form of policy rather than public record. He paused. Stay away from the third planet of the yellow star. Do not escalate. Do not provoke. Do not let your young politicians build careers on being the civilization that finally handled the human problem. He looked at Voss. Because there is no handling it. There is only starting it. Voss pressed on. You said you would tell us what you saw. You have told us history. Models. Warnings. But you have not yet told us what you personally witnessed that brought you to this chamber today. Oren nodded slowly. You are right, he said. I have been building to it. Old habit. When you have lived as long as I have, you understand that context is everything. A fact without context is just noise. I wanted you to understand the shape of things before I told you the specific thing. He straightened slightly. 1200 years ago, he said, by your standard calendar, I returned to Earth. He paused. I had been away for a long time. After the warning was issued, my people entered a period of withdrawal. We had done what we could. We had placed the warning. We had argued against intervention. And then we had stepped back because there was nothing more to do, and because watching something you love move toward an uncertain destiny is difficult. He looked at his hands. I returned because I had heard, through the few channels I still maintained, that humanity had achieved spaceflight. Crude, early, burning chemical rockets into a thin atmosphere. But spaceflight. The beginning of it. Something in his voice had changed. A new layer had entered it, something that the universal translators rendered as complex, almost contradictory. Pride, fear, love, grief, all at once. I positioned my vessel at distance and I watched. For 100 years I simply watched. And what I saw, he stopped. He stopped completely for a long moment. They were magnificent, he said finally. Everything I had always known they would be, made real. They went to their moon. Clumsy. Terrifying. 3 of them almost died just trying, and when they succeeded, the entire planet, all of them, every human alive at that moment, watched together. In the middle of all their conflicts, all their wars, all their divisions, they stopped and they watched together. And they wept. He paused. I wept too. In my ship, alone watching their broadcast. I wept because I had known them when they had nothing. When they were 40 people in the snow refusing to die. And now they were going to the stars. His voice was very quiet. But I also wept because I knew what was coming. He looked up. I made contact. Carefully. I had done it before in older forms, but this time I went to them honestly. As what I am. One old being from far away who had known them a very long time. He paused. They were not afraid of me. That was the first thing I noticed. Other species at first contact with an alien being of clearly vast age and power, there is always fear. Ah, certainly. But fear as the dominant note. He shook his head slightly. The human who met me, a woman, a scientist, small and sharp-eyed and relentlessly curious, looked at me for approximately 10 seconds and then asked me how my journey had been. A few sounds escaped the chamber. Almost laughter. Almost. She asked if I was hungry, Oren continued. She had brought food. For me. She did not know what I ate. She brought several things and laid them out and said, I wasn't sure what you'd like. He was quiet for a moment. I had not eaten a meal with another being in 60,000 years. He let that sit. We talked for a long time. She was brilliant. They had become brilliant, collectively, in the way that I had always predicted but still found remarkable to see fully realized. She understood physics in ways that would have impressed Athene scholars. She thought in frameworks that were genuinely novel. And she was kind. Specifically, deliberately, consciously kind, in the way that humans are kind when they choose it, which is a more powerful thing than the instinctive kindness of gentler species. He paused. I told her some of what I knew. Not everything. But some. The age of the galaxy. The other civilizations. The shape of things out beyond their system. She listened carefully and asked excellent questions and did not panic. He paused longer this time. And then she asked me something that I have thought about every day since. The chamber waited. She said, "Are we in danger?" He looked around the room. Not, "Is the galaxy dangerous?" Not, "Are there threats out there?" She said, "Are we in danger? Specifically, as a species. Is there something coming for us or something already arranged against us that we should know about?" He folded his hands. I told her about the council. About the early political discussions I had heard, the debates among younger civilizations about how to handle human expansion before it truly began. I told her that there were factions who were afraid. Factions who argued for action. He paused. She did not react with fear. She did not react with anger. She sat very still for a moment and then she said, "Okay." And then she said, "Thank you for telling me." He looked at the floor. I thought she hadn't understood the full weight of it. I tried to explain further, the models, the projections, the political reality of what organized galactic opposition to humanity could mean. And she stopped me very gently and said, "I understood you the first time. I'm not in shock. I'm thinking." He paused. She was quiet for perhaps 3 minutes. I counted. And then she said, "What would you do if you were us?" He looked up. I told her the truth. I told her, I would be very careful. I would be very deliberate. I would try to build relationships, genuine ones, with as many galactic civilizations as possible. I would be patient. I would show, over time, that human expansion was not a threat to others. I would try to demonstrate that the models were wrong. That humanity could grow and thrive without becoming what the frightened factions feared. He paused. She nodded. She thought about it. And then she said, "And if they don't let us? If they decide to act before we get the chance to show them?" He was very still. I did not answer her. I could not. Because the honest answer, the answer my models and my 4 billion years of watching had given me, was not a diplomatic answer. He looked at Voss. The honest answer was, then everything changes. And not for the galaxy's benefit. He paused. She saw it in my face. She did not need me to say it. She simply nodded again and said, "Then we better hope they're patient." He looked down. That woman has been dead for over 1,000 years now. She left children and grandchildren, and a scientific legacy that is still being built upon. She was one human in one moment, in one small room on one small planet. He raised his eyes. And she was the wisest being I spoke to in the last 1,200 years. He let the silence hold. "I came here today," he said finally, "because I made her a promise. Not in words, she died before this council became what it is. But in my heart. I promised her that if the moment ever came, if the galaxy's patience ran short and the frightened factions moved toward action, I would stand up." He looked at the council. "I would stand up and tell them what I know. What I saw. What 4 billion years of watching taught me." He paused. "So here I am. Standing up." He looked at every face he could reach with those ancient amber eyes. "Do not do this," he said. "Not because humans are invincible. Not because they are perfect. Not because they are without flaw or danger. Do not do this because you will not win. And in the losing, in the long, terrible, inevitable losing, you will make them into exactly what you feared they would become." He settled back. "You are afraid of what humans might be if left alone. I am telling you, what they will be if you make them your enemy is something your models cannot even begin to contain." He was done for the moment. And the chamber held his words like water holds a stone, taking the shape of it, settling around it, changed by the weight of it. The last WIS Part 6, Questions from the Floor. It was the Velhari delegate from the outer systems who spoke first. His name was Counselor Dreth, young, politically ambitious, and deeply uncomfortable with the direction the session had taken. He had come into the chamber this morning certain of the vote. He had spent 6 years building the coalition for it. He was not prepared to have an old man in a gray robe dismantle his certainty piece by piece. He stood. "Elder Orin," he said, his voice carrying the specific sharpness of someone who has decided that offense is the best defense. "With great respect, you have offered us stories. Emotional testimony. The account of one conversation with one human scientist over 1,000 years ago." He straightened. "This council deals in data. In verified reports. In documented evidence. Your models are 2 million years old. Your direct observation data is 1,200 years old at its most recent. In that time, humanity has changed substantially. They have spaceflight. They have weapons. They have. I know what they have. Oren said. Not sharply. Not defensively. Just, factually. The way you say the sky is blue. Dreth paused. Then you know that the situation on the ground is different from the situation you observed. The humans of today are not the humans sitting by fires in the snow. No, Oren agreed. They are considerably more capable versions of the same thing. Dreth pressed on. Our enforcement fleet at Kepler Station was a standard diplomatic vessel. Lightly armed. It was destroyed by humans using, he glanced at his notes, a repurposed mining laser and modifications made to a civilian cargo ship. In under 4 minutes. I know, Oren said. You know, Dreth repeated. And this does not strike you as evidence that they are already antagonistic? Already dangerous? Already operating outside any framework of peaceful coexistence? Oren looked at him calmly. The vessel was in their territorial boundary, he said. By your own survey maps, filed with this council 14 years ago, the Kepler Station region falls within the outer boundary of declared human space. Dreth stiffened. The declaration was not recognized by this council. It was recognized by the humans, Oren said. And as that was the relevant jurisdiction, he paused, they responded to an armed intrusion. The vessel was not armed for combat. It was armed, Oren said simply. The distinction between combat readiness and presence of weapons is a legal one. The humans operate on a different calculus. Dreth sat down unhappy. A different delegate stood, Whitus of the Marin, an older diplomat with 4 arms and the careful stillness of a species that had been spacefaring for 9,000 years. She was respected. She was not here to score political points. Elder, she said, her voice measured. I want to ask something directly. You say the warning was, do not antagonize. We have, by your account, already antagonized. The 6 years of diplomatic pressure, the enforcement vessels, Kepler Station. If your models are correct, if the trajectory you describe is accurate, what does that mean for where we are right now? Oren looked at her with something like gratitude. A real question. From someone genuinely trying to understand. It means, he said carefully, that humanity has already shifted its internal calculus. Before 6 years ago, before the first enforcement vessel entered their space, humans were looking outward with curiosity. They were young. They were excited. Some of their communications from that period, which I have reviewed, show genuine enthusiasm for the idea of a galactic community. They wanted to be part of it. He paused. After 6 years of sanctions, legal pressure, and 1 destroyed vessel, they are looking outward with a different emotion. Which emotion? Whitus asked. The same one that 40 people in the snow felt, Oren said. When a much larger force tried to end them and they spent a winter training in the cold and came back in the spring. Whitus sat down slowly. Another delegate, young Thessari, the same one who had spoken earlier, raised a hand carefully. Elder, is there a way back? From where we are now? Is there a path that does not end in what you're describing? Oren looked at the young delegate for a long moment. Yes, he said. The word moved through the chamber like sunlight. The path is narrow, he continued, and it requires this council to do something that is very difficult for governing bodies of any species. What? The Thessari delegate asked. To be wrong, Oren said. Publicly. Completely. Without qualification. He looked around the room. Not a negotiated position. Not a diplomatic reframing. Not a technical acknowledgement of procedural error. The humans will see through all of those things immediately and they will mean nothing. He paused. The council must go to Earth. Not send a delegation. Go. Physically. The senior members. Voss and the full inner council. Go to their world. Stand on their ground. And say we were wrong. We were afraid of what you might become and we acted on that fear before you had done anything to warrant it. We are sorry. Voss looked at him steadily. And you believe they would accept that? I believe they would consider it, Oren said. Humans have a remarkable capacity for forgiveness. I have watched them forgive things that by every logical measure should have been unforgivable. It is one of the most inexplicable features of their character. He paused. But it must be genuine. They are extraordinary readers of genuineness. You cannot perform this apology. You cannot calculate it. You must actually mean it. He looked at Voss directly. Do you mean it? Voss was quiet for a moment. Around her, the chamber waited. I need to understand more, she said finally. Before I can answer that. Oren nodded slowly. Then I will continue. There is something the models could not capture, Oren said. He had been speaking for hours now. The chamber had settled into a different kind of attention. Not the sharp, defensive alertness of the opening session, but something deeper. Something that was closer to listening. Our models were very good, he continued. The Ethini were exceptional scientists. We had 4 billion years of practice and we applied every tool we had to understanding humanity. And our models correctly predicted many things. He held up a finger. They predicted the pace of technological development, within a reasonable margin. Another finger. They predicted the social complexity, the political diversity, the economic patterns, the cycles of conflict and cooperation. A third finger. They predicted the expansion into space, the speed of it, the general shape of it. He lowered his hand. What they could not predict, what no model ever successfully captured, was the effect of humans on other humans. He paused. Let me explain what I mean. When we modeled other species, we could assign values. A Velhari individual under stress behaves within a certain range. A Marin collective under pressure responds within a predictable band. The variations exist, but they exist within a bounded space. You can model it. You can plan around it. He looked out at the chamber. A human individual under stress is variable. Very variable. More variable than any species we ever studied. The range of human response to crisis is so wide that the model becomes nearly useless at the individual level. He paused. But here is the thing. Here is the thing that took us a very long time to understand. He leaned forward slightly. When humans face something together, the variability does not average out. It multiplies. He let that sit. In every other species we studied, group behavior under stress converges toward the mean. The outliers, the unusually brave, the unusually creative, the unusually determined, are balanced by the outliers in the other direction. The group finds a collective response somewhere in the middle of what its members are capable of. He paused. In humans, the outliers pull the group upward. The most determined individual in a human group does not merely persist at their own level. They change the possible for everyone around them. One person who refuses to accept defeat rewrites the operating parameters of the entire group. He looked at his hands. I watched this happen. Many times. Too many times to call it anomaly. A group of humans in crisis will almost always find, from somewhere within itself, an individual who resets the ceiling. Who does the thing that everyone agreed was impossible, and in doing it makes it possible for everyone else. He paused. We called these individuals in our records ceiling breakers. And what made them remarkable was not that they existed. Every species produces exceptional individuals. What made them remarkable was what they triggered in the humans around them. He looked up. Hope, he said. The word was simple. Almost too simple for the chamber it was spoken in. Not optimism. That is a personality trait distributed like any other. Across the human population. Not courage. That is a resource, available in varying quantities to different individuals. Hope is different. Hope is, he paused, searching, it is the belief that the current situation is not the final situation. That tomorrow can be different from today. That the effort you make now will connect to a future worth reaching. He was quiet for a moment. Hope is a force multiplier of extraordinary power. When a human individual experiences genuine hope, not the vague hope of someone who has never truly faced the abyss, but the specific, hard-won hope of someone who has looked at the worst and chosen to believe in something better, it changes their capability. Measurably. Physically. We documented it. He paused. And when that hope is shared across a group, when a ceiling breaker creates hope in the humans around them, the group's collective capability increases in ways our models simply broke trying to calculate. He looked at the chamber. I want to give you a specific example. Not from ancient history. From 1200 years ago, during my most recent period of observation. He settled back slightly. At the time, humanity was in the middle of what they called a global crisis, a series of interconnected failures in their environmental, economic, and social systems. By every external metric, they were in serious decline. Population stress, resource competition, political fragmentation. Several of our observers, Ethini and others, had quietly revised their trajectory models downward. There was genuine discussion in certain circles that perhaps humanity would resolve the uncertainty themselves. That the internal pressures would prove sufficient to end the expansion before it truly began. He paused. I disagreed. I had been watching too long to be fooled by a crisis, however genuine. But even I was not prepared for what happened next. He looked at the floor for a moment as if reading something written there. A young woman, barely into her third decade of life, developed a method for large-scale ecological restoration. I will not go into the technical details, but in simple terms, she found a way to reverse certain types of environmental damage that had been considered permanent. That the scientific consensus at the time agreed was permanent. He paused. She was not working with significant resources. She was not backed by major institutions. She was operating from a small facility with a small team in a part of the world that the rest of humanity had largely decided to forget about. He looked up. She succeeded. And then something remarkable happened. He paused. Within 2 years of her publication, 17 research groups on different continents had independently expanded on her work. Within 5 years, the first large-scale implementation projects were underway. Within 20 years, 3 regions that had been classified as unrecoverable showed measurable improvement. Within 50 years, the global model had shifted. The downward trajectory reversed. He was quiet. Not because of governments. Not because of international agreements, though those followed. Not because of top-down institutional decision. Because one young woman in a small facility refused to believe that permanent meant permanent. He looked at the chamber. And because when she showed others what she had done, when they saw it with their own eyes, it changed what they believed was possible. And that changed what they attempted. And that changed what they achieved. He paused. This is the thing the models could not capture. This cascade. He searched for the word, this upward spiral that humans enter when one of their ceiling breakers succeeds. It is not rational by our standard modeling frameworks. It should damp out. The benefits of one breakthrough should be absorbed into the system, and the system should return to its previous trajectory curve. He shook his head slowly. It never damped out. Not once. In 4 billion years of observation, every time humanity experienced a genuine ceiling break, the cascade that followed pushed them to a new baseline. Higher than before. They never returned to the previous curve. They built a new one. He looked at Voss. This is what you are proposing to antagonize, he said. Not an empire. Not an army. Not a political system that can be negotiated with or pressured into compliance. You are proposing to antagonize a species that has spent its entire existence learning to break every ceiling ever placed above it. He paused. And I want to ask you something. Genuinely. Not rhetorically. He looked at her steadily. What ceiling, he said, do you imagine they will not eventually break? Voss asked for the names. You have mentioned, she said, that other civilizations received the Athene warning. That they kept it quietly in policy rather than public record. Can you tell this council which civilizations these were? Oren looked at her. Something moved in his expression, not evasion but care. Some of them no longer exist, he said. The chamber absorbed this. Which ones no longer exist? Voss asked, her voice very careful. Not because of humans, Oren said immediately. I want to be clear about that. Humanity has not yet, not directly, caused the extinction of any spacefaring civilization. The species that no longer exist fell to other causes. Internal conflict. Stellar events. The normal mathematics of impermanence. He paused. But some of them made choices in their time that are instructive. And I will tell you about those choices because they are relevant to what this council is considering today. He settled in his chair. 400,000 years ago, a civilization I will call the Myrati, because their actual name has no translation in any modern language, received the Athene warning and chose to act on the second interpretation. They were afraid. They were a proud species, highly advanced, deeply invested in their position as a dominant regional power. The idea of a species that their models showed eventually outgrowing them was intolerable. He paused. They sent a fleet to Earth. The chamber was silent. Humanity at that time had no spaceflight. No advanced technology. They were pre-industrial by your standards. They had no way of knowing the fleet was coming and no way of responding to it at the technological level the Myrati were operating at. He looked at the floor. The fleet did not complete its mission. He let the silence sit for a moment. The commander of the fleet made a decision upon entering orbit that his superiors had not authorized. He had been given very clear orders. He chose not to follow them. He paused. Why? Voss asked. He looked at Earth, Oren said simply. He spent 3 days in orbit watching the planet below. Watching the humans go about their lives, unaware of what was above them. And then he called his superiors and told them he was returning home without completing the mission. He paused. He was court-martialed. Stripped of rank. Imprisoned. He paused again. He spent the rest of his life in prison, insisting that what he had seen from orbit had changed something in him that he could not explain. That looking at the planet, at the small fires, at the movement, at the simple, impossible vitality of it, had made the mission feel like a crime he was unwilling to commit. He looked up. I interviewed him once. In his prison. He was very old. I asked him what specifically he had seen that changed his mind. He thought for a long time and then he said, they were singing. He paused. His instruments had picked up sound from the surface. Primitive, of course. They were using early acoustic instruments, voices, drums, resonant instruments carved from wood and bone. And he said, the sound was everywhere. Not in one place. Everywhere on the planet at all times there was singing. Different songs in different regions, different rhythms, different tones. But constant. He paused. He said, I had been on many worlds. I had seen life on many worlds. But I had never been anywhere that sang. Not like that. Not all the time. Not as if the singing was as natural as breathing. He was quiet for a moment. He said, I could not burn a singing world. Another long pause. The Myra T sent a second fleet, Oren continued. Different commander. Different orders. More efficient orders. He paused. The second fleet encountered a navigational anomaly 3 light-years from Earth. A region of space that their charts showed as clear was not clear. The fleet was forced to return to base for repairs. By the time they were ready to launch again, there had been a political change in the Myra T home system. The new government had different priorities. The mission was quietly shelved. He looked at the delegates. I will not pretend that the navigational anomaly was natural, he said. The Etheni were not passive observers in all cases. A murmur moved through the room. You intervened? Boss asked. We adjusted the star charts, Oren said, and created conditions in the navigational system that required 3 years to repair instead of 1. And ensured that certain political communications reached certain individuals at certain times. He paused. We were not supposed to intervene. Our policy was observation. But 11 of us voted privately to act. And we acted. He looked at his hands. I am not sorry for it. He paused. The Myra T civilization lasted another 80,000 years. They produced art and music and philosophy and scientific work that enriched the galaxy. They had complex, beautiful internal cultures. They were not a bad people. They were a frightened people, in a particular political moment, making a decision they could not fully understand the consequences of. He looked up. They're gone now. Not because of humans. Because of a stellar event 60,000 years ago. I visited their memorial, what remains of their home system, 70,000 years ago. He paused. Standing there looking at what was left, I was glad we moved the fleet. I was glad the commander chose prison over completion. I was glad their civilization had 80,000 more years to sing their own songs and build their own things and be whatever they were going to be. He looked at the chamber. I will tell you about 3 other civilizations, he said. Briefly. Because each one made a different choice. He held up a finger. The first made the choice the Myra T attempted. They sent a fleet. Unlike the Myra T fleet, it completed its mission. The humans at the time were reduced significantly, not to extinction but significantly. The civilization in question believed the problem was solved. He paused. Within 6 generations the human population had returned to its previous level. Within 20 generations it had exceeded it. Within 100 generations, they had developed the first precursors to spaceflight, 200,000 years earlier than our baseline models had projected. He let that sit. Pressure accelerated the timeline, he said. As the warning predicted. The attacking civilization, when they eventually understood what they had done, attempted to hide the records. We found copies anyway. He raised a second finger. The second civilization received the warning and did the opposite of the Myra T. They went to Earth not with a fleet but with a single ship. A gift ship. Carrying, he paused, carrying seeds. Agricultural plants from their homeworld. Varieties that thrived in Earth's climate. They left them in places where humans would find them, and they left without making contact. An anonymous gift. He paused. The humans found the seeds. Cultivated them. Were confused by them. They did not match any known plant variety, but they grew and they were nutritious, and several of them became stable parts of certain regional diets. He paused. The civilization that left them is one of humanity's oldest trading partners today. He raised a third finger. The third civilization did nothing. Received the warning, debated it, and decided that the correct action was to simply go on with their lives. Not approach. Not attack. Not gift. Simply exist in their own part of the galaxy, minding their own affairs, and trust that the universe was large enough for everyone. He paused. They are still there, he said. A quiet, prosperous, unremarkable civilization in a pleasant part of the outer arm. They have had no conflict with humanity. They have had no contact with humanity. He looked around the room. They are safe, he said simply. And they are safe specifically because they made a choice that, in the moment, probably felt like cowardice, like avoidance, like a failure of decisive leadership. He paused. It was none of those things. It was wisdom. The rarest and most undervalued quality in any governing body. He looked at Voss. I have told you about civilizations that attacked. Civilizations that helped. Civilizations that ignored. The outcomes vary significantly. He paused. I have not told you about any civilization that successfully opposed humanity through direct force and achieved a lasting result. Because there are none. The sample size is small, only 2 serious attempts in 4 billion years. But the result in both cases was the same. He looked at the chamber. Acceleration, he said. The humans under threat accelerated. The last witnessed the session was formally suspended for the night cycle. Voss sat in her private chambers above the grand hall, the lights dimmed, the quantum feeds closed. She had sent her staff away. She needed to think without anyone watching her think. The vote was scheduled for tomorrow morning. She had the numbers, or she had had the numbers before this morning. Before a gray-robed old man had sat down in a plain chair and begun quietly demolishing the foundations of 6 years of careful coalition building. She pulled up the latest delegate reports. 17 confirmed position changes since the session began. 12 more marked as uncertain. The coalition was not destroyed, but it was stressed. Cracked at the edges. Several of her most reliable allies had sent her private messages during the recess that she was still working through. I need more time to consider. The elder's testimony raises concerns I had not anticipated. What assurance do we have that his models are accurate? She read them all. She set them aside. She went to her window and looked out at the city, the ancient city built around the ancient hall, 3,000 years of architecture stacked and woven together, the work of a dozen species who had contributed to this place over its history. 3,000 years. Orin had been watching Earth for 4 billion. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and tried to hold both of those numbers in her mind at the same time. Her civilization's entire history against one being's memory of a single planet. She was Velhari. Her people were proud and practical, and she had always believed, that pride and practicality were not in conflict. That you could be both without contradiction. You could be proud of what your civilization had built and also clear-eyed about the realities of power in the galaxy. The reality of power, as she had understood it until this morning, was, humanity was young and disruptive and their growth curve was manageable if addressed now. The Council had the authority and the capability. The legal frameworks were solid. The reality of power, as she was being forced to consider it now, was, they might be about to do something irreversible. She sat down. She pulled up the full Ethini records that the Council's historical archive had, thin, incomplete, but genuine. The fragments they had managed to locate over the years. She had reviewed them before the session, of course. She had not found them alarming. Ancient history. Old warnings from an old species. She read them again now. The second time through they felt different. She found the fragment her historians had flagged as most significant. A partial record, badly degraded, written in the Ethini primary script that had taken 60 years to translate. The message was incomplete, but the core of it had survived. She read the translated text. We have seen them at their worst and at their best, and the best of them is something we do not have a name for yet. We have seen them bury their dead and then feed the living. We have seen them build in the morning and mourn in the evening and build again the next morning. We have seen them break and we have seen what they do after breaking. We have no model for what they do after breaking. The Council asks us whether they are a threat. This is the wrong question. A river is not a threat. A fire is not a threat. The wind is not a threat. These things are forces. They move. They shape. They change everything they touch. The question is not whether to fear them. The question is what you intend to do when they arrive. She set down the tablet. She sat in the dark for a long time. Then she did something she had not done in years. She opened a private channel, not to her staff, not to her political allies, not to any council member. She opened a channel to her daughter, who was at university studying astrophysics in a city 3 systems away and who called her mother once a week and always seemed slightly surprised that Voss picked up. The call connected. Her daughter appeared on the screen, rumpled and surrounded by research tablets, clearly working late. Mom? It's late there, isn't it? Is everything okay? I have a question, Voss said. A strange one. Her daughter raised an eyebrow. Okay. You study space. You have studied it your whole life. When you imagine humanity, the humans, what do you imagine? Her daughter was quiet for a moment, clearly surprised by the question. Chaos, she said finally. But interesting chaos. Like, when you observe a system that you think is random and then you look closer and you realize there's a pattern, but it's a pattern you've never seen before. That's what studying their history feels like. Every time I think I understand the pattern, they do something that breaks it. She paused. Why? Are you afraid of them? Voss asked. Her daughter looked at her strangely. No. Should I be? Voss looked at her daughter's face, young, sharp, comfortable. Born into a galaxy where humans were a distant curiosity, not a political reality. I don't know, she said honestly. Her daughter leaned forward. What happened today? In the session? An old man told me things, Voss said, and I'm not sure how to hold them. Her daughter was quiet for a moment. What kind of things? Things about what it means, Voss said slowly, to fight something that doesn't know how to stop. Her daughter thought about this. That sounds less like a military problem, she said carefully, and more like a philosophical one. Like the question isn't whether you can win. It's whether winning means what you think it means. Voss looked at her daughter. 11,000 years of Velhari civilization, she thought. And my daughter, at her age, in a conversation that took 40 seconds, just said something it took me a full day to arrive at. Yes, she said quietly. That's exactly it. She closed the channel. She sat in the dark. She thought for a long time. And in the morning, she walked back into the grand hall with a different question in her mind than the one she had arrived with yesterday. Oren looked different in the morning. Not physically, his ancient body was unchanged, the amber eyes the same, the gray robe the same. But something in his bearing had shifted. He sat in his plain chair with a stillness that was different from yesterday's stillness. Yesterday he had been patient, waiting for the right moment, measuring his words, building carefully towards something. Today he was finished building. Today he was going to show them what he had built. Voss called the session to order. The chamber was even more full than yesterday, if that was possible. Word had spread through the night. Delegate staffs had worked through the dark hours sending summaries to home systems. 600 quantum screens had become 900. Several civilizations that had sent observers rather than voting delegates had scrambled to upgrade their representation overnight. Everyone understood that something significant was happening. Elder Oren, Voss said. Her voice was different this morning too, still precise, still authoritative, but with something new underneath it. Something that was not quite certainty. You have given this council your historical testimony, your models, your observations from both ancient and recent history. You have spoken about the warning your people issued and why. She paused. Is there more you wish to say before this council votes? Yes, he said. There is one more thing. He reached into the pocket of his gray robe and withdrew something small. He held it out toward the chamber, not dramatically, not with any gesture of significance. Simply held it out so people could see. It was a small stone. Gray and smooth, roughly oval, small enough to sit easily in a palm. It looked like something picked up from a riverbank. Ordinary. Entirely ordinary. 4 billion years ago, he said, when I first came to Earth, I took this from a riverbed. As a reminder of the specific place I had landed, the specific river, the specific morning. He looked at the stone. I have carried it since then. Through everything. Every event I have told you about. Every century of watching. Every journey away and every return. Every conversation with every human who ever sat across from me by a fire or in a room. He paused. I am going to tell you about the last conversation I had. Before I came here. He set the stone in his lap. 8 months ago, before I received the council's summons, before I knew this session was being called, I went back to Earth. A final visit, I thought. Or perhaps just another visit. With beings as old as I am, the concept of last becomes complicated. He paused. I sat in a city. A large one, loud, dense, layered, the way human cities are now. I found a small place to sit, a kind of public garden between large buildings, the sort of space humans carve out of their constructed environments because they cannot bear to be entirely separated from growing things. He almost smiled. A child sat down near me, perhaps 7 or 8 years old. Waiting for someone, a parent, I assumed. She was bored. She looked at me and said, "You're very old, aren't you?" The chamber held very still. I told her yes. She asked how old. I told her, very old. Older than she could imagine. She thought about this seriously, the way children consider serious things, and then she said, older than my grandpa? He did smile this time briefly. I said, yes, quite a bit older. She said, older than the dinosaurs? I said, yes. She said, older than the sun? He paused. I said, roughly the same age as your son, actually. Give or take. He looked out at the chamber. She thought about this for a long time. And then she asked me, do you get lonely? He was quiet. I told her the truth. I told her, yes. Sometimes. He paused. She was quiet for a moment, and then she slid across the bench and sat right next to me, close the way children have no self-consciousness about proximity, and she said, I'll sit with you for a while if you want. He stopped. The chamber was completely silent. Her parent arrived 10 minutes later, he continued quietly. She left with a wave. I never learned her name. She did not know mine. She did not know what I was or where I came from or what I was carrying in my chest at that moment. He looked at the stone in his lap. She just sat with me. Because I was old and she thought I might be lonely. That was the entire reason. Nothing more than that. He looked up at the chamber. This is what you are proposing to go to war with, he said. Not the fleet that destroyed your enforcement vessel. Not the engineers who improvised a weapon from mining equipment. Not the diplomats who rejected your frameworks. He paused. All of those things are also human. But this is also human. And I want you to understand, in 4 billion years of watching them, all of these things come from the same place. The same root. The same essential nature. He looked at Voss. The same species that will fight you to the last individual is the species that will sit with a lonely stranger because it seems like the right thing to do. The same people who reversed an extinction-level catastrophe with 40 survivors are the people who leave seeds as anonymous gifts. The same civilization that destroyed your vessel is the civilization that stopped a 9-day migration in the killing cold to make sure one injured member survived. He paused. They are not one thing. They are everything. All of it simultaneously. The full range of what a thinking, feeling, willing species can be, compressed into one small, loud, impossible, magnificent civilization. He was quiet for a moment. And I have loved them for 4 billion years. And I am terrified for them. And I am terrified of what you are about to do. He looked at Voss directly. Not because they will lose, he said. They will not lose. I have never seen them lose when it mattered. I have seen them pay enormous costs. I have seen them suffer in ways that should have broken them forever. But lose, finally, terminally, accepted and stop. No. I have not seen that. He paused. I am terrified because of what winning will cost them. What fighting you, what being made into the enemy of the galaxy, will do to them. Not to their population. Not to their fleet. To them. To what they are. He looked at the stone. The child who sat with me because she thought I was lonely, she exists inside the same civilization that will come for this council if you vote yes today. And when they come, and they will come, I promise you they will come, they will win. But they will not come as that child. He placed the stone on the floor in front of his chair. And they may never be that child again. He looked at Voss. That is my testimony, he said. That is everything. That is the whole thing I came here to say. He settled back. I am asking you, not for their sake though I would ask for their sake, but for your own, and for what this galaxy will be in 1,000 years, do not do this. He folded his hands. Please. Voss did not call for the vote immediately. She sat for a long moment. The chamber waited. Nobody moved to pressure her. Whatever political calculations had been running through this room for the past day had not disappeared. They were still there, all the ambitions and fears and alliances and debts that make up the interior life of any governing body. But they had gone quiet. Temporarily. Under the weight of something larger. She looked at Oren. He sat still, hands folded, watching her without expectation. She thought about her daughter. About the fragment she had read the night before. About what winning means when you're fighting something that doesn't stop. She thought about 40 people in the snow. She activated the chamber's formal record. This session is entering the deliberation phase, she said. All delegates with voting authority, please confirm attendance. The confirmations came in. 412 in chamber. 907 remote. Full quorum. The largest vote this council had taken in 3 centuries. She looked at the motion on her screen. The one she had spent 6 years building toward. Authorization of coordinated force against the planetary body designated Earth and its associated territorial claims, for the purpose of ensuring compliance with Galactic Council statutes and frameworks. She read it through once. She set it aside. She opened a new document. The chamber watched her with confused silence as she typed for several minutes. When she was done, she looked up. I am withdrawing the original motion, she said. The noise that erupted was immediate and enormous. Dreth was on his feet instantly. Several delegates were shouting. The quantum feeds showed the remote delegation's invisible chaos. 900 screens of beings all reacting simultaneously. Voss let it run. She let it go for a full minute. Then she tapped the resonance rod 3 times, hard, and the chamber gradually found silence again. I am withdrawing the original motion, she repeated clearly for the record. And I am introducing a replacement motion. She read from her screen. Proposal for direct diplomatic re-engagement with the planetary body designated Earth, including full council acknowledgement of procedural and ethical errors in prior engagement, and a request for formal negotiation of a new bilateral framework. She looked at the chamber. I will be requesting that the inner council, myself included, travel to Earth in person. To stand on their ground. And to do what the elder described. She paused. To mean it. Dreth stood. Chief Arbiter, you cannot simply, this coalition was assembled over 6 years, the legal authority. The legal authority for this motion is the same authority as the original, Voss said calmly. And the coalition can reassemble around a new motion or it can dissolve. That is the coalition's choice. She looked at Orin. He was watching her. The amber eyes were very still. Elder, she said. If this council votes for the replacement motion, if we come to Earth as you described, will they receive us? Orin was quiet for a moment. I don't know, he said honestly. I cannot promise you a welcome. I cannot promise forgiveness. Humans do not forgive on schedule. He paused. But I believe, I have always believed, that they respond to honesty. Genuine honesty. Not diplomatic honesty. Not negotiating position honesty. The real thing. He looked at her. If you go there meaning what you say, they will know. And they will respond to that. He paused. It will be the beginning of a very long conversation. Not an ending. Not a resolution. A beginning. And the conversation will be difficult and complicated and there will be moments when it nearly fails. He paused. But it will be a conversation. And a conversation is not a war. Voss looked at the chamber. I am calling the vote, she said. The vote took 11 minutes. For a chamber of this size, on a motion of this magnitude, 11 minutes was almost instantaneous. The replacement motion passed. Not unanimously. Dreth voted against and 26 other delegates voted against and 41 abstained. The political damage to Voss's coalition was real and she would spend the next year repairing it. But it passed. 412 civilizations represented in that chamber voted to choose conversation over force. Orin sat very still through the counting. When the result was announced, he did not cheer. He did not smile or stand or show any visible sign of relief. He simply sat and closed his eyes for a long moment and breathed slowly. When he opened his eyes again, the amber was very bright. Not with triumph. With something quieter than triumph. Something that had no name in any modern language, but that the universal translators rendered, approximately, as the specific relief of someone who has been afraid for a very long time and can, for this one moment, be a little less afraid. He picked the small stone up from the floor. He put it back in his pocket. The grand hall emptied slowly. Delegations filed out in clusters. Some animated, some quiet, some clearly already deep in the political calculations of what the vote meant and how to position their civilizations in relation to the new direction. The quantum feeds shut down one by one. The staff began the long process of closing the formal record. Orin stayed in his chair. He was in no hurry. He had learned, over 4 billion years, that there was very little that genuinely required hurry. He sat in the emptying hall and watched the lights adjust as the chamber's automated systems shifted from full session brightness to maintenance mode. The ancient stone walls looked different in the softer light. Older. More themselves. Voss came to him when the last delegates had cleared. She did not sit, she stood, which he noted. Standing rather than sitting was a Velhari marker of respect toward someone you considered a peer. It was a small thing. He appreciated it. Thank you, she said. You made the decision, he said. I only provided information. Information delivered in a way that made it impossible to ignore, she said. That is not a small thing. He acknowledged this with a slight inclination of his head. She was quiet for a moment. Then, do you think it will work? The mission to Earth. He considered the question honestly. I think it has a chance, he said. Which is more than it had yesterday. She nodded slowly. I have to ask you something. Personally. Not for the record. Go ahead. Why did you come? She said. You said you made a promise, In your heart, to a woman who has been dead for 1,000 years. But you could have kept that promise differently. You could have found other ways to intervene. You could have done what your people did before, adjusted the navigation charts, shifted the political communications. She looked at him steadily. Why come here and testify? Why do it this way, the slow way, the uncertain way? He thought about this for a long time. Because I am old, he said finally. And because I have lived long enough to know that the things you do by indirect means and the things you do directly, they are not the same. He paused. When the Atheni moved the fleet 400,000 years ago, we were right to do it. I believe that. But we did it from a distance. We moved pieces on a board without showing ourselves. Without being present. Without being accountable. He looked at his hands. There is something about being in the room, he said. About standing up and saying, I was there and I saw this and this is what I know. There is a dignity in it. For the one speaking, yes. But also for the ones listening. You are given the chance to make a real choice, with real information, rather than being managed by unseen hands. He paused. I have managed from a distance for a very long time. I thought, perhaps this once I should simply stand up and tell the truth and let the chips fall. He almost smiled. I have been spending too much time with humans. That is a very human way to think. Voss almost smiled back. You said they changed you. Everything I have ever loved has changed me, he said. That is what love does. She was quiet. What will you do now? She asked. He looked around the ancient hall. At the stone walls. At the high ceiling with its ghost clouds of vapor. At the floor polished by 10,000 years of 10,000 species. I will go back to Earth, he said. I would like to be there when your delegation arrives. Not as an official party, just nearby. Watching. He paused. I want to see what happens. I have always wanted to see what happens. She nodded. She started to turn, then stopped. The child, she said. In the garden. The one who sat with you. He looked at her. Her, Voss said. Do you think about her? He was quiet for a moment. Often, he said. More than most of the things I have seen, which is a long list. He paused. There is a word in one of the older human languages that I have always liked. It is not used much anymore. The language itself is mostly historical. But the word is Ubuntu. It means, approximately, I am because we are. The idea that a person's full humanity is expressed through their relationship with others. He looked at his pocket where the small stone sat. That child did not know me. Had no reason to offer anything. But she sat with me because, in that moment she saw someone who might be lonely and she could do something about it, and so she did. He paused. Ubuntu. That is the word for it. And in 4 billion years I have not found a better summary of what makes humans, exactly what they are. He stood slowly, unfolding from the chair with the careful deliberateness of extreme age combined with maintained dignity. He looked at Voss one final time. Take care of yourself on the journey, he said. Earth is louder than you are expecting. And brighter. And it smells of, he paused, searching for the word, growing things. Constantly. The whole planet smells of things growing. He paused. You will either love it immediately or find it overwhelming. In my experience, there is no middle ground. He walked across the empty chamber toward the main entrance. At the door he stopped. He turned back once. Chief Arbiter, he said. She looked at him. When you get there, when you stand on their ground and say what needs to be said, he paused, look at their faces. Not at the diplomats. Not at the official delegation. At the ordinary people watching, if you can see them. He paused. That is where you will see the answer. Not in the formal response. In the faces. He turned and walked through the door. The grand hall was empty. On the floor where his chair had sat there was nothing. No mark. No sign. Only the ancient stone, polished by 10,000 years of footsteps, and the ghost clouds drifting near the ceiling, and the particular quality of silence that settles into very old places after something important has happened. The human delegation received the council's ship at the boundary of their declared space. Not with weapons. With an escort, 3 ships, sleek and fast and clearly capable of significant force, but flying with running lights fully visible and on an open communication channel. The lead human pilot's first words to Voss's vessel were, "Welcome to human space. We'll take you in safely. Try to keep up, we fly fast." Voss smiled when the translation reached her. The landing was in a city, a real city, not a diplomatic compound, not a neutral station. They landed in a city and they walked through streets and people stopped and watched, and there were children in the crowd who waved at the alien delegates the way children wave at anything unfamiliar that does not immediately frighten them, with enthusiasm and zero self-consciousness. Voss stood before the human council. She had prepared a speech. She had worked on it for weeks. Every word measured. Every acknowledgement calibrated. She looked at the human faces in front of her. She set the speech aside. She said, "We were afraid of what you might become. And we acted on that fear before you had done anything to earn our fear. That was wrong. I am sorry." 11 words of apology. Plus the 3 words of reason before it. The room was quiet for a moment. The lead human representative, a woman, older, sharp-eyed, with the specific stillness of someone who had been watching the world a long time, looked at Voss for a long moment. Then she said, "Okay. Let's talk." In a small garden 3 streets away, an old man in a gray robe sat on a bench. He was not alone. A different child, not the same one, a new one, perhaps the same age, had wandered over and was telling him, in considerable detail and without any sense that he might not be interested, about the alien ships she had seen landing from her window that morning. He listened. He asked questions. She answered them with the complete confidence of someone who has fully processed a remarkable event and is ready to be the expert on it. He reached into his pocket. His hand found the small gray stone. He held it. The sun was warm. The city smelled of growing things. Somewhere nearby someone was singing. The oldest being in the galaxy closed his eyes. And for the first time in a very long time he was not afraid.